Katakuri is my fourth favorite character in One Piece, and this might be somewhat of a surprise for some of you because of my reputation as his hater. But no, this isn't a joke. I genuinely love his character and what he brought to the story as a whole. So in today's video, let's take a deep dive into his character and what makes him so great. What's up guys, Restless Gambler here, and today is Katakuri's birthday. Fun fact, since November is Katakuri's birthday month, I plan to actually dedicate multiple videos to praising him. But in October, I got hit with a barrage of copyright strikes, and to my surprise, Katakuri fans were laughing at my downfall. So yeah, clearly I didn't go through with that plan, but I still wanted to make at least one video about him, and why not drop it on his birthday? If you like analysis videos like these, go ahead and subscribe. You'll get more videos, and we'll both be happy. One of the core themes of Whole Cake Island was being true to yourself. We see this theme being conveyed to us through many characters within this arc, but three characters in particular stand out as extremely fleshed out, and they all are connected in one way or another to Katakuri himself. The first character that I'll go over who we see play out this theme is Katakuri's own sister, Pudding. Pudding is introduced into the story as this perfect wife for Sanji. As soon as Sanji laid eyes on her, he thought she was attractive, and when she meets Luffy, Nami, Chopper, and Brook, she's in love with cooking and loves compliments regarding them. But we later find out that this was all an act. In chapter 848, Pudding says something to Luffy and Nami that makes Luffy literally want to lose both of his arms to get out. 2 chapters later, we find out what Pudding truly looks like and how she truly acts. We all remember this scene, but there's a slight irony in how Pudding is acting and how she looks. While she's insulting Sanji in front of Reiju, her eye is the most present. She says, "I'm mama's favorite, especially when it comes to acting." Then says, "Only my family knows what I'm really like." And notice that whenever she's doing the acting, she hides her eye in order to pass off as this kind girl, showing us a glimpse of her insecurity. In fact, in the very next page, we see this exact thing in play. Back where Luffy and Nami are in prison, we get a flashback of what exactly Pudding said. She starts off by saying she won't marry Sanji with her innocent look and expression and eye hidden. Then when she crouches down to tell Luffy and Nami that she's gonna kill Sanji, her eye is present. And funnily enough, once she walks away with this innocent expression acting like she's doing nothing wrong, her eye is nowhere to be found. Now before I connect this back to Katakuri, there's more I want to go over. At the end of chapter 859, Pudding says that she's depressed the day of the wedding. Her reasoning was that since she's going to kill Sanji, a lot of blood will be on her dress, and most importantly, after she kills Sanji, she'll have to erase everyone's memory if she wants to keep up the good girl act. But the most fascinating thing about all this, with Pudding continuously claiming to be acting, is the fact that this isn't actually an act, like at all. This is Pudding's true nature, how she naturally is. In chapter 861, she goes along with her plan to kill Sanji. Sanji lifts her veil and he's met with a third eye on her forehead. Notice that she says it's her hideous third eye, and when Sanji looks at it, he's like, "Damn, that shit is beautiful." And without even a thought, Pudding cries on the spot, falling to her knees. Notice what she says in reaction to what Sanji said about her eye. What is he saying? Don't give me that crap. Not once since I was born has anyone said this eye was beautiful. As she says this, we enter a short backstory for her. Her own mom tells her that her eye is creepy and tells her to grow her bangs out. Then we see kids and other people bullying her for her third eye, calling her a monster. And guess what all this bullying and calling her a monster did to her? It literally made her turn into one, or rather, accept that she is one. This is why as soon as we return to the present, Pudding is literally saying she's a hideous three-eyed monster in her head. The fact that she's never been accepted for how she looked made her change how she acts in order to fit the role, as well as change how she looks. When she hides her eye, she acts the way she was always supposed to act. And when she doesn't hide her eye, she acts like a monster to fit her role. But because she was thrown into this at such a young age with no one really to accept her, she thought that this was how she was always meant to act. In chapter 864, Pudding is shooting at Sanji and tells him that this is her true nature and that she's fooled plenty of people like this before. The word nature here is super important, but I think you can figure that out on your own. But what Sanji says in response is a whole bar. He says she's been fooling herself as well. This is in line with what I've been saying. Pudding's true nature isn't acting like a sadistic asshole. Had she grown up with people who accepted her for how she looked, she wouldn't have to act like that. But instead, she had to accept that she was a monster, and so she started acting accordingly. But notice that she usually doesn't try to act how she wants to act with her eye actually showing. And when she tries to, her conditioning literally makes her justify what she's doing in a monstrous way. The perfect example of this was chapter 876, when she pulls up with her sister to save the Straw Hats. She's literally only there because she doesn't want Sanji to die, but she says it in the opposite way because she doesn't know how to act when her eye is showing. Now, I've been rambling a lot about Pudding so far, so connecting this all the way back to Katakuri, Pudding is his perfect parallel. Katakuri's backstory is literally almost the same as hers. Pudding got told to cover her eye with bangs, and Katakuri got told to cover his mouth. They both ended up doing it, but low-key for similar reasons. Pudding did it because it was the only way she could act how she truly wanted to act without being made fun of, or in other words, trying to be accepted, even if she didn't know it. And Katakuri did it because he wanted to put up a front to make himself the dependable older brother that his siblings can rely on, while being taken seriously. After all, the reason Brule got scarred was because Katakuri beat up the people who made fun of his face. Without something to make fun of him for, his siblings in turn stay safe. This is why Katakuri's whole thing is being perfect, so there's nothing wrong with him even if he has to hide how he truly looks. This is also why as soon as Katakuri reveals his face to his sister, she freaks out, calling him a monster. Sound familiar? My take is that Pudding is a character who expresses Katakuri's desire to hide his true physical appearance in order for other people's validation. But this isn't all, because what actually makes this so fascinating is the fact that the two main Straw Hats of the arc, Luffy and Sanji, free both Pudding and Katakuri of their burden. Obviously, you already know Sanji did by making her realize that she fooled herself, and notice that ever since that time, we see her eye way more than earlier. Heck, last time she was in the manga, she's fully accepting her third eye. But in Luffy and Katakuri's case, well, before we dive into that, we have to discuss another parallel with Katakuri, that being Sanji. Sanji entered Whole Cake Island against his will in order to protect the crew. Throughout the entire arc until he teams up with Luffy again, he keeps on expressing that this entire thing is for the sake of the crew. But that's the thing, this is for his crew and not for himself. Sanji doesn't actually want to marry Pudding because he wants to continue his journey with the crew, but he's going with the flow just so the crew will be safe in the end. But once he finds out that all of this was a ruse, he cries, because not only did he throw away his relationships with the Straw Hats, but he also has nothing in his current situation. The only thing he has now is sudden death. In chapter 852, he's telling Reiju what exactly is going on, and then he says this: "All this time I assumed that if I accepted a marriage, it would save Luffy and the others, and it turns out that that was never in the cards to begin with. I thought I could just sacrifice myself and everything would be perfectly fine. What kind of fantasy world was I living in?" Sanji literally tells us that he wanted to sacrifice himself for the crew, but now everything is f***ed up. But again, the main thing to focus on is the fact that Sanji does want to continue the journey with the crew, but is hiding that away to sacrifice himself. This is mirrored with Katakuri. In his backstory, his own brother told him that he would have friends if he just covered his mouth, but Katakuri tells him, nah, this is me. But eventually, because he wants to protect his family, he covers his mouth and puts up a persona that he doesn't actually want to act out. Someone who's never laid on his back, absolute perfection. And the most powerful way Oda expresses that both of these characters aren't being true to themselves is through their actions. Their temptation to go back to how they truly feel is shown to us firsthand. When Sanji is about to give Pudding a basket of food, guess what foods he made? He made the favorite foods of every single Straw Hat. This showed us firsthand what he truly wants to do. He wants to go back to the Sunny and be the cook of the Straw Hat pirates. but because of his burden of responsibility and his desire to protect the crew, he accepts his fate and tries to go along with marrying Pudding. On Katakuri's side, while he keeps this perfect persona up, having zero imperfections, Katakuri literally designated a time in his day to literally be himself. This isn't an exaggeration. This guy will literally hide in Brulee's world, build a house of mochi, then be himself. He'll lie on his back, he'll show his face proudly, and eat a bunch of donuts. This is what Katakuri wants to do all day. Eat donuts. And if you notice from the dialogue when Luffy breaks the mochi house, him laying on his back and eating donuts isn't perfect. And he's showing the audience that. But again, because of his burden of responsibility and the desire to protect his family, he puts up this perfect persona and neglects what he truly feels. While Pudding is what I think was a character to express Katakuri's desire to hide his true physical appearance, I think Sanji's role in the arc was to be a character to express Katakuri's desire to hide his true emotional appearance. Both Sanji and Katakuri have their own thoughts and things they want to do, but neglect it in order to protect those dear to them. Earlier, I mentioned how both Katakuri and Pudding were freed from their burdens to a certain extent by Luffy and Sanji. But it's funny because while that's true, Sanji was freed from his burden by Luffy. When Sanji beat Luffy up in order to prove that he's done with the Straw Hats, Luffy just kept getting up, and Sanji actually noticed this, expressing how much it annoyed him. All Luffy did was tell him, "I'm gonna be right here, and if you don't come back, I'll starve to death." So when Sanji eventually comes back, he feeds him, and as he's finished, Sanji tells him to leave. Luffy insists that he comes back with them, but Sanji gives him 3 reasons he can't. Number 1 is that he disrespected his captain. Number 2 is that Zeph is held captive. And number 3, his family will die to the hands of Big Mom. And so again, he tells Luffy to leave. But Luffy's not with it because he knows he's not being true to himself. So he punches him and asks him what he truly wants. And Sanji cries, admitting that he just wants to come back to the Sunny. After this moment, Sanji goes along with the plan that will ultimately lead to what he actually wants, and so in turn, Luffy has freed Sanji from his burden. But Luffy does the same for Katakuri. Katakuri vs Luffy was a visual representation of the man who never gets knocked down versus the man who always gets back up. Luffy's retaliation is something that Katakuri has never gone against, and he expresses how annoying it is, just like Sanji. However, just like Sanji, Luffy retaliating so much was the starting point of him freeing Katakuri. In chapter 891, we're introduced to Flampe. She is the try-hard sibling, trying to get validation from every single brother or sister. So in this case, she will represent all of Katakuri's family. Now the reason this is important is because when she turns her attention towards Katakuri's fight with Luffy, she says, "I don't like seeing him struggle so much. He must be perfect at all times or I'll be very disappointed." This is literally Katakuri's burden personified. If he's not this perfect brother at all times he's being shown, his siblings will be disappointed, and even more, they'll be in danger beyond the eyes of just the siblings. However, Flampe's team tells her that Katakuri isn't necessarily struggling, but Luffy is just sticking around too long. Luffy's constant retaliation and him constantly getting back up is putting his perfection in jeopardy in the eyes of his siblings. And in fact, he's being so imperfect because of Luffy that his reputation gets sabotaged with outside help. If it weren't for Luffy's great will making him stick around longer than he's supposed to, Katakuri would have stayed as this perfect guy in the eyes of his siblings. But this just isn't the case during the fight. Luffy is the first person who's hit Katakuri, the untouchable man, in years. Luffy is the first person to expose Katakuri's face, something he covered to be perfect, in years. Luffy is also the first person to expose Katakuri, someone who's never laid on his back, for laying on his back. Luffy quite literally deconstructed his perfect persona through sheer will. And once Katakuri got outside help, which was the last thing to shatter Katakuri's image, he fully gives up on the persona. He stabs himself, symbolizing his descent from perfection. He throws off his mask, revealing his true physical features, and later in the fight, he chooses to lay on his back, revealing his true emotional personality. This is why as soon as Katakuri stabs himself and shows his imperfections, Flampei says, "You're not my perfect brother, you're just a gross loser." But why should Katakuri care? He's free from his burden and he'll be himself. But regardless, that's how Katakuri teaches us to be ourselves.